Okay. It is my pleasure to introduce one of my favorite brothers and somebody that we love to call our brother-in-law. My whole family calls him that. A wonderful lawyer and someone that I've always looked up to, my older brother. And we'd like to also dedicate this this lecture to the schus, the merit of Rabbi Sachs, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. I'm not sure what his Hebrew name was, but it should be a merit for him for all of his years of inspiration for all the Jewish people. This lecture is brought to you by a few organizations, Chabad of Rara and Chabad of the Hunter and Dominion, and also Hamayan. I'd just like to ask Rabbi Shmerling of Hamayan to say a few words before my brother Chezky tells us what needs to be said. Rabbi Shmerling?
Thank you, Rabbi Yossi, and welcome to everyone here so far. Just wanted to share a short thought from Rabbi Sachs of blessed memory that relates to today's topic. When there is a problem, when something in the world is not right, we have three approaches. We have the approach, and this is not a joke, we have the approach of the mystic, of the therapist, and of the Jew. The approach of the mystic who sees a problem is, he looks at a problem and says, I don't see any bad, there is only good. Everything is lovely. The therapist says, let me try to understand you, let me empathize with you going through this difficulty. We're going to try to really hear and feel your difficulty. The Jew says, fix it. And therefore, when we have confronted, when we have noticed, become aware of issues regarding human rights, people not being treated as they should, the Jewish response is, what can I do to better the situation, to improve things, right the wrong if possible, or at least reach restitution? We look at human rights primarily not through the vantage point of rights, but responsibilities. We are all responsible to make the world a good place, a righteous place, and a place of justice. And we thank Chezky for his efforts in that regard. You're truly doing the work of Abraham, Jewish work, and we're really excited, looking forward to hearing about details. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm introduction. So first of all, Shavua Tov for everyone. Again, I know it's in the afternoon by you, but we just finished about 2 hours ago. So Shavua Tov here. Coming to you from South Florida. For those of you wondering where Rabbi Yossi got his boyish good looks and charm, now you know. But anyway, on a more serious note, there was a terrible terrorist threat today, where the terrorists took a room full of lawyers hostages, and they threatened to release one every hour if their demands were not met. But anyway, I don't know how it works in Australia, but over here everybody has a lawyer joke. But in all seriousness, it's that 99% of lawyers make the rest of us look bad. So hopefully I'll be able to give you a better look on lawyers here. So by way of brief background, I'm still getting out of the Shabbos mode, so forgive my English. Rabbi Yossi and I were both raised in Pittsburgh. We're both one of 11 they got, and I am number 4, if I'm not mistaken. Yossi's number 6 or 7, I think 7. Do the math.
9.
Number 9. Oh, my bad. Yes, number 9. I knew that. I just tested you. Um, I originally thought when I originally started my secular education career in college, I originally thought I would become a psychologist. Started studying psychology, and actually ended up in the food business. Became a chef and actually opened up a restaurant. And I had a very good client of mine. One of the best customers was an Orthodox lawyer who had his office right down the block, and he used to come in to have lunch, regularly. It turned to like 3 times a week, and we became really good friends. And he would tell me all the stories. We would argue and discuss. Didn't even occur to me at the time, but a couple years later, we had some really bad storms here in Florida and some really bad hurricanes, and the economy took a real turn, and it wasn't a great time for restaurants. And on my wife's advice, decided to go to law school. So it is a second career for me. It's been I've been coming up on 15 years or so. It's been a very interesting ride. But people are interested hearing about civil rights. It's a hot topic now. So happy to discuss. But I do want to say that I really enjoy having questions, because I could speak for hours about stuff that are interesting to me. I don't know how interesting it is to you. So I really appreciate the questions. I want to talk about what you want to hear. So please, in the chat, if it's enabled, hopefully it's enabled, you could just type your questions, or maybe I don't know if I'm going to see it. So if Rabbi Yossi or one of the rabbis can ask the questions, I'm happy to address it. Again, this is really about giving value to you. I have something prepared to say, but I certainly want to address your questions, even if it's concerning the American legal system, and questions you have, or misunderstandings, or just to clarify. Happy to do that. Lawyers love telling war stories, and we got a lot of stories to tell. But I don't know in Australia if it's popular, the McDonald's story. Does everyone know about the McDonald's story in Australia? Is that
Right now, everybody wants to know the Donald story, not the McDonald's story about the courts there, but we're not going to go there today.
We don't have time for that.
If anybody does have questions, feel free to text it to Rabbi Shmuley, Rabbi Khan, or myself, or in the chat if it is enabled, and we will ask it out loud.
Okay, great. I say the McDonald's story is a very famous story in America, a very famous lawsuit where a woman got coffee in McDonald's and put it in the drive-through, put it in her seat between her legs, and drove off, and ended up getting burnt and sued McDonald's, and it was like a $2 million verdict. So in America, it's a well-known story that this is wrong with the American legal system. If it's not a big story in Australia, I'm going to let it go. But again, if you have any questions, happy to help. So one of the to me, one of the biggest advantages and one of the most beautiful things about being a lawyer is the opportunity to meet other Jews in a setting that a lot of rabbis don't have, or other people don't have. And Lubavitcher Rebbe was adamant and repeated throughout his many years of leadership that when two Jews meet, there has to be a good outcome to come out of it. And when two Jews meet as an opportunity to have a spiritual awakening, have something positive grow. And be a lawyer in the setting that I am, whether it's a judge, whether it's opposing counsel, whether it's clients, I have an opportunity to make a connection in a way that the greatest rabbis don't have. And it's a real opportunity. For example, my law firm is one of the only law firms that I know that I have a pair of tefillin designated specifically for the law firm, and it's there, and clients and opposing counsel and other lawyers, opportunity to put on tefillin. It's been used many times, thank God. So that's the number one lesson that if I can impart is that if there's ever a time the two Jews get together, there has to be some kind of positive, some kind of spiritual positivity come out of it. I'll never forget, I was once in front of a judge. His name Peter Skolnick. Judge Skolnick was like an old time New York judge, where he used to come. He wouldn't have his hearings in the courtroom like most judges. He wanted it in his office, and we call it chambers. We don't use wigs, although I'm considering using a wig myself. One of the things I'd like to adopt from Australian legal system. We don't use wigs here. but he liked to do things in his chambers. And one day I was in his chambers for a hearing. A hearing is basically where you have an issue. We call it a motion, where you're asking the court for something. In this case, the other side was asking the court to dismiss the case. So the lawyers from both sides come and they argue in front of the judge, and the judge decides. So we sat there. There was a young woman on the other side of the table. Judge Skolnick was on his side, and I was there, and it was her motion. So she gets to start. And in middle, Judge Skolnick, he turns to me. He's like, "Let me ask you." It was my first time in front of him. I was actually just a brand new lawyer, and he says, "Let me ask you, what was harder, yeshiva or law school?" And there were a few other lawyers. Everyone looked around, and we started talking, and we got into a whole conversation. And turns out his father was a rabbi in Brooklyn, and he was very interested. And after about 20 minutes, the other attorney, she started clearing her throat, and it was like, "Your Honor, if I may continue on with my motion." And he said, "You're in my chambers, and I'm going to ask what I want to ask, what I'm interested in." In any event, the hearing went by, and I said at the end, I said to him, I said, "Your Honor, I noticed you don't have a mezuzah in your office. Can I? I'm happy to bring a mezuzah by. We'll come. We'll hang it up." So with a twinkle in his eye, he turns to me. He says, "Are you trying to bribe a sitting judge in a case? You offered me a gift." So I said, "Judge, I'm not offering you a gift. I'm helping you, to complete your responsibility that you have." And he turns to the other attorney and he says, "Do you have any objection?" And it turns out she was Jewish, and she says, "No, as a Jew, I would never stop that." And then the judge said, "Well, what about separation of church and state we have here?" I said, "Your Honor, I'll be happy to represent you for free if there's any issues." And the next day we went by and hung up a mezuzah, and I believe he had it until he retired. I went back to visit him a couple of years later, and he still had it up. So anyway, just one of the stories you have, because walking into court looking the way I do, you can't get around it. It's readily noticeable, and that's one of the big advantages of being an Orthodox lawyer, is the opportunity that these questions come up, the discussions and mitzvahs come up. I'm nursing a little cold here, so forgive me for drinking tea in the middle. All right, so a couple of cases I want to highlight. I've been fortunate and I've been blessed in my career to have litigated approximately 1,000 cases, about 500 in federal court and 500 in state court. We have two different systems here under federal law and under state law. I want to highlight a few of them here. One of the more interesting ones was a case that I sued Deutsche Bank and Credit Suisse. We were suing for $3 billion, and this goes back to money that was taken during the Holocaust era. The story starts back in the 1800s with this gentleman named Joseph Wertheim. He lived in Frankfurt, Germany. He opened up the Wertheim sewing machine company. They were one of the largest manufacturers of sewing machines. They started doing knitting machines. They then moved into bicycles and washing machines. Rebecca, could I share my screen? I can't. It says it's disabled.
Dom, are you able to enable the sharing? And Chezky, would be I have some of the citations afterwards if anybody wants to read.
Right.
Yeah, I think the sharing has to be permitted by the host. So whoever's the host, that might be you, see? You might need to enable the screen sharing.
The host is Zalmi Glasner.
Yeah, Zalmi should be on it.
Okay. And anyway, in any event. So if you Google my name, Chezky Rodal, Yechezkel, and type in Wertheim or Deutsche Bank, you'll see the story. It's all over the news. If you click on my name and you click on the news tab, you'll see a lot of stories, a lot of my cases that got public attention. I'm not going to focus on most of them, just focus on a few of them. This is interesting in the sense that, it involved money that was taken during the Holocaust time. So in 1899, Joseph Wertheim died. At that time, there were two branches of the family. He was the head of the Frankfurt side. He had 10 children. And in those days, when he died, his revenues were worth in the millions of dollars. This is back at the turn of the century. And he had 10 children, but his son Carl, who I believe was the fourth, was the gifted one, and he was the one that ended up taking over the business. As the 1900s progressed, Carl realized what was coming up in Germany and started diversifying. If I have trouble, whoever it is that's not on mute, to go on mute, that would be beneficial, I think, for everyone. Thank you. So it's not a proper Zoom until someone asks to put on mute, right? So now it's official. So in the 1920s, Karl Wertheim realized what was coming and realized that Germany was not going to have a bright future for the Jews. So he started diversifying. He started putting a lot of his money, a lot of his assets into Swiss banks. He moved, opened up a factory in Spain and started diversifying across Europe. And of course, everyone knows that Swiss banks were known for their secrecy. And let me see if I can share here. I see, just to give a little idea, this is could you see the screen? Great. The top picture is when the factory opened up. It was all over news as one of the biggest factories. This is in 1868, to give you an idea of how big it is. And then that 650 workers. And then here, they opened up in 1870. This is where there was one in Barcelona. So you can get an idea of how big these factories, because they already had a basis in Spain. So later on, in the 1920s, started moving a lot into Spain. In any event, almost all the Wertheim children were killed. The Berlin side of the family, which is very tragic, it was very common in those sides. They were very high up. In fact, Joseph Wertheim was a very involved in politics. And the Berlin side of the family thought that this would just wash over. Hitler was getting to power, but they figured it would just be another wave of anti-Semitism, and they decided to stay and figured that they were so entrenched in politics and in the army and in social affairs that they would be safe. Unfortunately, virtually the entire Berlin side of the family got wiped out, and the Frankfurt side that had moved survived. And Carl, I believe only 3 siblings survived. Carl married a woman named Maria. They had no children. So when they died, their nephew, who they were very close with, his name was Dr. Baumel, he basically took over the business with Maria. Maria died in 1976. So we're not talking about very long history, but Dr. Baumel was very involved in this until 1976. We have uncovered, there was a handwritten ledger, to give you an idea of what we're talking about, a handwritten ledger from 1961 that it showed from Carl Wertheim, showing that he had $144.5 million in 3 specific numbered accounts. That $144 million is today valued at $3 billion, according to our experts. We believe there was a lot more in other accounts that we don't have information for, but these are the numbers that we specifically have. So to make a really long story short, the Carl Wertheim had this German lawyer who basically ran everything for him. It was his confidant. He was his personal lawyer, his business lawyer, very good friends, and trusted him implicitly, and he had access to everything. This lawyer had, I'm not going to say his name because there was actually a lot of litigation in Germany over defamation for saying his son's name. He had 2 sons. One of them took over this job, and he was an officer in Deutsche Bank. After Dr. Baumel died in 1990, so Dr. Baumel also was apparently a rather unique individual. He had some strange tendencies. It's like he was never married. He was really a loner, very eccentric. He had befriended this German couple, non-Jewish German couple. They were both teachers, and he really liked education. And he basically gave over his entire inheritance to this German couple, and basically, according to them, told them that he wanted his fortune to go to education, and he wanted very specifically a substantial portion to go to Jewish education. And again, this German couple was not Jewish, but they came forward and said that this is what he wanted. As soon as he died, they sent a letter to Credit Suisse and to Deutsche Bank telling them that the Baumol inheritance was now theirs, putting them on notice that Dr. Baumol had died, that the Wertheim inheritance shouldn't be touched until a court would decide. And the banks admit to getting this letter. There was a big fight in German court over the inheritance. At the end of the day, the German court upheld this German couple's rights. However, in the interim, Deutsche Bank turned around and somehow the entire money from those accounts were emptied and put into Credit Suisse account. It happens to be that this lawyer who was working for the family was a board member of Deutsche Bank. And now all this money's gone. Credit Suisse says they don't know anything about it. Deutsche Bank says they don't know anything about it. It's going on for years and years in Swiss courts and German courts. Ultimately, there was a foundation set up to support Jewish education called the Wertheim Jewish Education Fund. You can Google that. That would be the name of the story. And that ultimately is who I ended up representing. One of the beneficiaries of that fund was a Florida synagogue, a Florida Education Center. And the case was filed here. I filed the Southern District case, and we sued Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank for $3 billion. They were trying to get information. Ultimately, we ended up losing the case. It was really a long shot. We ended up losing the case on jurisdictional grounds. Essentially, the court ended up holding that it didn't have any jurisdiction over Credit Suisse or Deutsche Bank, neither of which are American banks, and that we needed to go back to Germany, which is going on, as far as I know, is still going on. I don't have anything to do with that. But it was a very interesting case to get into the details. It was a very, very heavy fight. The other side, to give you an idea of what was at stake. So there were four law firms representing, two law firms representing each of the banks. Deutsche Bank had a law firm called Milbank, which is an international law firm headquartered in New York. They're founded in 1866. Last year, their revenue was over $1 billion. That's just their revenue. Their local counsel here was a firm called Ackerman, which was founded in 1920. Credit Suisse hired a local firm called Carlton Fields, also almost 100 years old, and their main attorneys was one of the biggest American firms, or most prestigious American firms, called Melvany, founded in 1885. So they had this four law firms against good old me, yeshiva boy in Florida. I was working with an attorney out of New York, but it was really us. So what are you going to do? So of course the yeshiva cup, the Yiddish cup, comes in, and I called one of the first days when the other attorneys came in. I called them up and I said, that I know who you are, your reputation precedes you, and I just want to let you know that I am really looking forward to working with you and seeing your professionalism. I know we're on the opposite sides, but I really look forward to learning from you. And after that, showing a little humility, the whole relationship, I tell from when he got on the phone to afterwards, how mean is he going to be to a guy who just told him how much he appreciates the professionalism. And it turned out that it was a very difficult fight, a very hard fight. But opposing counsel, after we lost, he took the time. He emailed me. He said he just wanted to let me know what a mensch I was and how much he respected the way I handled it. And it just goes to show how for me, looking the way I do puts you on a certain notice that you have to act, because I'm representing the Jewish people, whether I like it or not. That's just the way it is. And to have that, and to be told, no matter how much you advocate for a client, you can still be a mensch about it. and that really is the way I try to run my cases. So that lawyer that I was working with in New York, so actually now that I think about it, the way I originally got to the case was there was a guy here in Florida that I knew that he had come to me a couple years earlier. So this story goes back to growing up in Pittsburgh. We had a kid came to our school from Hungary. His name was Shlomo Kovesh. He was a kid from Hungary. He didn't have any good schools in Hungary, so he came to Pittsburgh and he boarded at someone's house, and we were classmates, became friends. Shlomo Kovesh is now a big rabbi in Budapest. And there was a story in a few years ago, I don't remember the year now, probably 8 or 9 years ago, where they uncovered a tunnel. They were excavating and they uncovered a tunnel, and they found, this was an old dumping ground from Nazi Germany, and they found a bunch of treasures, and they found, I believe it was 140 Torah scrolls that had been lost, that the Germans, that had been taken from different synagogues, and they were just sitting in this underground tunnel for 70 years. And the Hungarian community apparently had been looking for these Torahs for many years. There was a known thing that there was these missing Torahs, and it was a tremendous celebration. Again, you could Google this. And one of the Torahs ended up in Florida, and this guy I was asked to get involved with. There was a lot of issues and getting it back. So I remember the day the Torah actually came in, he brought it to my office to see it. It was in terrible disrepair. They had to hire experts. Even just I'm looking at it. I got to hold it, and it was a real moving and emotional moment to see it. But it was in very bad shape. The even the strings where they tied together, the pieces of parchment were ripped up. The ink was in bad shape. I didn't see the final version, but I'm told that it was fixed and it's now being used in a synagogue. There was a big fundraising effort to restore these Torahs. Last I heard, a lot of them were back in use in Hungary, which is a tremendous thing. But in any event, this lawyer had a connection, this gentleman who was involved with Hungary had a connection with the Wertheim Fund and brought me in, and that's how I ended up getting involved. And so this lawyer in New York, he calls me up one day and says, I'm working on another case. Do you want to help out? I said, sure. He said, I think you may find this interesting. So turns out that he's a professor in a law school in New York, and he's been involved in indigenous rights in an African tribe, indigenous rights, where he's represented indigenous people against various African governments that have been abusing them, etc. So he tells me about there's these two tribes called the Nama and Herero tribes. If you Google the Herero genocide or the Nama genocide, you'll see there's a BBC documentary on it. There's lots of documentaries on it. I will tell you that I didn't know anything about this. Most people I talked to didn't know anything about it. And it's very, very fascinating. And to see the connection between this and the Holocaust, which you'll see very soon. So this happened at the turn of the century, at the turn of the 20th century. In about 1904, basically Germany there was a mad rush to colonize Africa and other nations, and Germany was in desperate need for they needed materials, and East Africa was rife with oil and various other materials they needed. So Germany kind of just took over, and this happened in what today we call Namibia. So basically, originally the Germans came in and they weren't so forceful, but it ended up being, of course, more forceful. And there were two tribes in Namibia, the Nama and the Herero tribes, that ended up saying, "No, you know what? We're not going to put up with it." And there was a rebellion. There's plenty of stuff online that you can see about it. Let me see about sharing this here. Essentially what they did is they took these tribes. I'm sorry. Let me. So this is the picture here. So basically, what they took these tribes and they built up concentration camps, forced labor. You can't really see it in this picture. Again, there's a lot of gory pictures on that. I didn't want to get too much into it, but what they did is they made these tribes wear red triangles to identify that. They made them wear it on all their clothes. Whenever they would go out, they had to wear this red triangle. You could see in this picture, you know, they were chained. They took all the leaders of the tribes and they chained them up. They engaged in systemic rape and torture of women and children. They started having killing fields. And once they had quashed the rebellion and set up these concentration camps, what they started doing was, you know, at that time there was a goal to prove the superiority of their Aryan race, and they started doing. This doctor came from Berlin and started doing medical experiments on live people. If all this is sounding familiar to you, you'll understand that this doctor ended up going back to Berlin, taking his findings and presenting in university in Berlin, and in the crowd listening to it was a young medical student, they of course named Joseph Mengele. You know, may God erase his memory, but he was Mengele was in the crowd listening to this doctor presenting from his medical experiments that they tested on these live subjects. And of course, he would go on to do incredible, unspeakable atrocities with live medical experiments. So again, at that time, the German crowd, the Germans there. Interesting what they did is, again, you'll see the similarities here. What they started training the soldiers, and there was a special group that was sent over to quash rebellion. They started indoctrinating them that these tribesmen and Black people in general were subhuman, and they were essentially on the level of dogs. And they wrote books about it, similar to what happened with the Jews later. In order to allow for such inhumane atrocities to be completed, they had to first get the soldiers to not identify these human beings as human. And by the time they got there, they, you know, it was just unspeakable crimes. I tell you one thing that they did is they wanted, again, to prove the superiority of the Aryan race. They were studying the physical specimens, and they wanted to ship back a bunch of skulls back to Germany. These skulls are really important later on for the case, so that's why I'm highlighting it. But you know, how do you ship skulls? So what they did is actually a picture of it. You could see them packing up the boxes of skulls if you look at it online. But you know, they wanted to just send the skulls. So how did they get this? What they did was, they had the people that they killed, they had their own wives and mothers take glass shards and scrape the skulls of all the flesh and all the hair, and they specifically made their own wives and daughters and mothers do this, and so they could send back the skulls so they wouldn't get smell during transit, etc. These are just some of the inhumane, beyond inhumane, but some of the real evil, you know, characteristics that the Nazis later came known for. An interesting side note is, because this was in Africa, you know, the uniform they wore was like a beige greenish uniform. Later on, these young soldiers in 1904, by the time the 30s came around, they were now the officers of the SS. And if you know the certain brigades, they wore the brown shirts, which was different than the rest of the German army and even the rest of the Nazis. And these SS officers were the soldiers that had been there, and in homage to that time, they continued wearing these stormtrooper uniforms. And these were the cruelest of the cruel that had been trained to these African killing grounds. These were those soldiers. You know, these pictures may look familiar, they're just a different color, but these were the survivors, some of the survivors of the Herero of the uprising. So, you know, similar to what the pictures of when the concentration camps were finally, you know, were finally evacuated. So I say this all. Germany for many years, for a century, has denied the atrocities, have denied this ever happened, denied it was a genocide. It's important to note the word genocide because when a genocide happens, it triggers certain international laws, and there's international agreements, there's reparations, there's all kinds of things that happen after a genocide, which is why there's so much talk about calling something a genocide. Which is why, if you may know about the Armenian genocide, has been a fight for over 100 years to call it a genocide. Also, because once it's labeled a genocide, there's a lot of legalities that come with that. So, the Herero and the Ovarero and the Nama tribes were basically wiped out. There were few survivors. They left. At this point now, there are, there's a small community that are now mostly in the diaspora. For those that don't know, there's still a German presence in much of Africa, especially in Namibia, still from that time. But the Herero and Nama people have been fighting to get back these skulls and these body parts to bury their relatives for many years. And these skulls were, and we have documents, they were traded, they were sold, and they're actually currently sitting in New York City right now in an exhibit in a museum. In 2018, it was a 100-year anniversary of the Armenian genocide. The Armenian genocide occurred with Turkey in 1918. It's 2018. It's 2016 or 2018. 2018, I believe. It was a 100-year anniversary. There was a big to-do at the UN. A bunch of countries got up and started and were hammering Turkey to recognize it as a genocide. And one of those countries was Germany. And Germany was being very hard on Turkey about how they could do this, etc. So we took the opportunity, or not we, but this other attorney in the group saw the opportunity. Well, Germany, if you're now recognizing, if you're urging that the Armenian genocide was genocide, then what you did, what you've been denying for 100 years, is also genocide. So we took the opportunity to sue them based on this admission in the UN. And the link that we had with America was we had these skulls that had been sold and bought in New York. We also alleged that Germany had purchased property in New York, specifically in America, using proceeds that had come from, at least partially, from their illegal occupation in Africa. And again, this is another long shot. And I'm going to be talking today about a few of the cases that I lost. I'm talking about these are more interesting, but if you want to see more of the other cases, please. I've given this talk before, and someone commented like, "You only talk about cases that you lost." But these are some of the more interesting cases. And I found this very compelling. It was essentially a practice run for the Holocaust, and there were so many similarities. It's very eerie, and for me to have not even known about it. I was very surprised to learn about this. I don't know how many of you are learning about it for the first time, but very interesting if you look at the documentary and you see just how the evil started then. So we filed a lawsuit, and now the question is, how do you get Germany to come to American court? So we have a system where it's called service of process. You have to serve a copy of the lawsuit on the other side. And there's all kinds of ways to do this against another country. And we went through those processes, and there's something, the Hague Convention, there was a international treaty by all the countries, how they agree to accept service of process. So basically we sued on behalf of the Ovarero and Nama tribe. We sued the Republic of Germany, is what they're called. And we went through the process, and Germany basically said, they sent a letter to the court saying, we received your lawsuit. Here is back. Thank you very much. You have no jurisdiction over us. We won't be appearing. Have a nice day. We tried to go to diplomatic route at that time. The Obama administration, we tried to get them to help, which they would, but there was some political things going on with Germany. they didn't help. It was like a 6-month ordeal. And after it was almost 8 months, we couldn't get Germany served. We finally filed a motion with the judge and said, Judge, we did everything we need to do. If Germany is not going to come to court, then we'll get a default judgment against them and they lose. And, here we consider them filed. We followed all the laws. They were served. And, they have 20 days to respond. If they don't respond within 20 days, we intend to move for what's called a default judgment. A default judgment is someone who doesn't show up in court. They basically waive their right to defend the case. Well, once you know it, 19 days later, Germany hired a big law firm in Washington, D.C., and they showed up. And again, the big issue was jurisdiction. Did the American court, have jurisdiction over Germany? It's a very touchy subject when countries sue each other, of course. Ultimately, the court in New York ended up finding that there wasn't enough of a connection between the atrocities in Germany, in Africa and New York, and that she did not have jurisdiction over Germany. We filed an appeal with the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in New York. Just a few weeks ago, the Second Circuit came out and said, no, there's no Germany. We just filed, actually just last week, we filed a new motion asking the entire Second Circuit to look at this, saying that the court got it wrong. So this is still ongoing. Again, it was a long shot. We'll see. Hopefully this is, if the Second Circuit Court of Appeals agrees, then our next and only resort is the United States Supreme Court. And the way it works is they have to agree to accept it. We don't have a right to appeal to them. We have a right to appeal to the middle court.
Can a court, a lawyer, a firm in Germany take the case? Or both of those cases that you mentioned?
Yes, but it'd be very difficult to sue Germany in Germany. I don't even know that you can sue Germany in Germany. Of course, like the Wertheim case, people want to sue in America because of our legal system and the judgments. Like, for example, in Germany, one of the things that I learned in the course of the Wertheim case is you actually have to put up a bond if what you're suing for is a certain amount of money. You have to put up a bond, and there's limits on judgments and how you collect judgments, which is why so many people want to sue in America, because of our more liberal, more liberal justice system and the way you're able to collect the judgment. So that's really the go-to place. Since then, very recently, Germany has agreed to sit down with the Namibian government. Unfortunately, they have refused to allow any of the tribes to partake in it, of course, and in Namibia, with all the corruption going on in Africa, it won't be a shock that they come up with some kind of deal that doesn't address the skulls or the Namibian or these tribes at all. But anyway, that's a case that's going on right now, and as the grandson of Holocaust survivors and someone who had way too much family killed in the Holocaust, it was extra meaningful to be a part of this and to help fight for justice for these people that were victims of the same regime and the same evil that my own family was a victim of, and it's still ongoing. And we hope that there's going to be some justice. At the very least, we certainly brought a lot of attention to this matter. A lot of the news covered it at the time when the court case was going on here in America, and ultimately it brought Germany to the table. What happens with that, again, will remain to be seen. But hopefully, hopefully the case will be allowed to continue to go on. Give me 1 second here.
Does that make you despondent that there's just all this inequality, all this stuff that happened and you can't do much about it? Does it make you doubt the whole system?
Well, that's a good question. No, so being in this field and dealing with this on a daily basis and seeing the inequality, maybe I'm a little jaded to it. I think people will be very shocked to see what goes on in the legal system, in the world in general, the inequality that actually happens. But I guess for me at this point, because I've seen so much of it, I'm not anymore. It's sad to when you lose a case. I don't like losing cases. I put in a lot of work in this case, and it's not a good thing to lose. But sometimes the fight is the important part, and the fight is part of the justice system. And even if you lose, you still put up a fight. One of the hot topics now, and especially in America, I don't know how it is in Australia, but the whole Black Lives Matter movement and inequality, that kind of thing. So a lot of what I do in my law firm is civil rights cases. I deal with a lot of police misconduct cases. So basically, the types of civil rights cases I deal with are basically split up into two types. There is the police misconduct, which we're suing government actors, either police or city or prison, things like that. And the other are private discriminations. So if you Google my name, Wells Fargo, banking while black, you'll see a lot of cases went viral on CNN, New York Times. Some of those cases where I have a bunch of clients that were discriminated against through Wells Fargo, the police were called on them. Some cases going on right now. As a matter of fact, the New York Times ran a story about 2 months ago, highlighted it was against four people. Three of them were my clients, and it was a long story. You could look. It's a great story in the New York Times. Banking while black. Again, if you Google banking while black, or my name or Wells Fargo, you'll see it. As a result, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago now, there was a bunch of senators, American senators, got together and proposed a bill to specifically target discrimination in financial institutions. That bill is now going to the Congress, and we'll see who the next president is to sign it, whether it gets signed or not. But it was very gratifying to see that, and in the Senate, you could see that on the website where they talk about the bill, they specifically say that it was reading this New York Times article and my client's stories that that was the catalyst for this bill. So very gratifying to see, even though we may lose a case here or there, but it's the progress, it's the movement, it's the justice of it. The one client that was highlighted, for example, she's studying to become a preacher. She's a gospel singer. I met her in Atlanta. Very nice, sweet young woman. She's in college. She was driving for Uber to make some money on the side, and she had gotten a $200 check. It was a business check. She had moved out of her apartment. She got her deposit back from her rental, and she was driving a customer for Uber, and she ended up in a very affluent white neighborhood suburb in Atlanta. And she saw Wells Fargo, and the check was from a Wells Fargo bank. So she went in to cash the check. She gave her ID, did everything. At the end of the day, they ended up calling the police on her, accusing her of forging the check. This is a $200 check. The police came, and of course, it was found out to be a valid check. And we ended up filing a lawsuit of discrimination. The case is still pending. The Wells Fargo moved to dismiss the case, claiming that she didn't have a case. The judge denied their motion about 2 months ago, and we are still in the middle of that case. That's in Atlanta. I have a couple other cases in Florida. In fact, one case out of Tampa. We're going to mediation this week, and so these are ongoing cases. But the more interesting and more compelling cases are the police misconduct cases. And this is a very, very hot topic now in America. And I want to give a disclaimer, so to speak, that in my business, I see the worst of cops, right? I deal with the bad police officers, right? The police officers that I'm dealing with are the ones that are being accused of bad things. So I may be a little jaded in that sense, that I don't deal with good police officers. So what I'm talking about, I'm not speaking about in general the law enforcement industry. I'm sure there's a lot of very good police officers, but there are certainly a lot of not such good police officers that abuse their power. Personally, I'm not here to weigh in on how much of it is racially motivated or not. I have white clients that are abused. To me, it is an abuse of power, and it's police misconduct, and it's black officers abusing black citizens and white citizens. It's white officers abusing white and black. There certainly is a lot of racial components to it, and there's certainly a lot of racial aspect to it. I'm not here to get into that or weigh into that, but I will tell you that police misconduct is very real, and fighting a lot of very interesting cases. The reality of it is that the way it is in America right now, it's a very uneven playing field. That the police officers are given tremendous deference, and when I go into court, I have everything stacked against me, from the law side, from procedural side, and it's a very difficult thing to do. It's very difficult to actually win these cases. They make it very expensive, very time consuming. And one of the things we're fighting is to change some of those laws. I don't want to get too much, I'm happy to answer questions, but I just want to leave you with this thought that, all these videos that we're seeing, I assume they're making their way to Australia, all of these videos that are, of all the discrimination, racial discrimination. These are just videos that we're seeing now that are being captured on video. Imagine what was going on 20, 30, 40 years ago. Imagine what was going on 10 years ago that wasn't caught on video. Imagine what's going on today that wasn't caught on video, right? Imagine these things that we're seeing now, this blatant police misconduct that is caught on video, and just imagine how much is going unrecorded. So, for years and years, Black people have been saying the police did this and the police said we didn't, and they've been believed. And now the tide is starting to change simply because of all the documented evidence. So that has been, I think, one of the biggest things are these videos that are coming to light. But there's a long way to go. There's some simple laws that could be changed. And, one of the big fights in the American election was, to see how that's going to change. And I think based on who the next president is, based on who the Congress and Senate is, we'll see how those things develop. But, even President Trump was very involved in prison reform and did a lot of things behind the scenes on that side. So there has been some change. I don't think protests are really the way to change things from my perspective. I think there's some legal things that could be changed. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions about this, but I thought I would move on to some questions that I regularly get asked. Rabbi, you stop for any questions?
My question that I've been asked is, has observing Shabbos, the Shabbat, has that held you back or made you not included in a case, or have you had to drop any cases based on your Shabbat observance?
Okay, so as I was saying right before, I asked some of the questions that I regularly get asked, and one of those questions is, how does being religious, how does being frum affect my job? And I will say that it really affects me in three ways. Number one is Shabbat, not just Shabbat, but also the holidays. There's a lot of days that we can't work. So in America, specifically in Florida and South Florida, it is one of the most densely populated Jewish areas in the world outside of Israel. So over here, many of the judges and many of the lawyers are Jewish. So for example, the courts are closed on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah sometimes. The public schools here are closed on Yom Kippur. So, it's a very different proposition than if I was practicing in Oklahoma or in Idaho. That probably would affect me a lot more. But here, when I say that my office is closed for 2 days because of Sukkot or Simchat Torah, it's not a problem for me. In a sense, it has never stopped me from taking any cases. I've never been denied what we call a continuance from a judge. I've never had a judge tell me, when you have to be here. What it does is it puts a lot of pressure on like deadlines or so. And when I check my email after a 2-day holiday, it could be very stressful and a lot of anxiety, but I have to make up the time. But other than that, no, it hasn't negatively affected me. I will say that the ability to be able to turn off everything for 26 hours on Shabbat is an incredible blessing. I know many of my colleagues go 24/7. I don't know how they do it. I go 24/6 a lot, and being in litigation and in this field, it is a uniquely stressful, and it's nonstop, and it's constant deadlines and being on top of things and clients and judges. Um, I couldn't imagine doing this 24/7, and to have that opportunity where you go and you have to stop and you have to take a break, and even just, you know, knowing that time for family and spending that time, that day just with my family and in shul is really, really special, unique. And I, you know, when I have, and I'm fortunate to have a lot of lawyers that I know come over to the house for Shabbat meal, and you know what they always say is, we wish we had this time that we could turn off, and of course explain to them that they do. But for me, it's a real blessing. You know, the other issue that I face being Orthodox is kosher. So of course, for me, keeping kosher is not the issue. It's more of the social side of it. So almost all lawyer gatherings are in restaurants, and every time we go for conferences or things like that, it's all involving food. And I generally try not to go to non-kosher restaurants. I will go to a conference even though it's not kosher, but even just being there, it's very awkward. I was in right before Corona, which seems like forever ago. I was actually a week before. It was in February. I was in Cancun, Mexico, for a conference, and fortunately, Cancun has a delicious multiple kosher restaurants. But where I was, it was difficult, and just sitting there, some of my colleagues were very nice, just kept offering me food, not realizing, just trying to be nice, and it just makes things uncomfortable, socially awkward, and also everywhere I travel to Tampa, I travel around, there's always that thing about food. So that is, it does make things awkward. I will tell you, I will admit that the biggest thing that I have, the most uncomfortable part of being a religious Jew, is a religious lawyer, is shaking women's hands. So for those of you that have tried to shake your rabbi's hands, you'll know that in the Chabad community, in many Orthodox communities, we don't shake the hands of the opposite gender, and generally there's that physical separation. Of course, in the legal world, it's absolutely commonplace to shake hands, and for me, it's a very awkward and uncomfortable. I have the speech prepared, as everyone does, but it's still, no matter how many times I do it, it's still uncomfortable. And I will walk in with my phone or my briefcase in my right hand, just the things you come up. The one thing I'll say, if I could say the one positive thing to come out of COVID, is that I haven't had to deal with shaking hands in a while. We'll see how long that lasts for, but I'm now not the only one in the room not shaking hands. Not that I'm in the room with too many other people too much, but that is definitely a struggle. It's a real challenge for me. But we do what we have to have. Another question I get a lot is how did yeshiva help with my career in law? I'll tell you that so one of the things about being yeshiva and studying Gemara, which we do a lot, the Talmud, is thinking outside the box, right? So Talmudic law didn't per se help me at all with the law, of course, but it's the thought, it's the thinking outside the box. So when I was in law school, it had been many years since I had been in school. Again, a second career, it's been many years, and and seeing my colleagues, the other students in there, deal with certain questions, topics, and for me, and I had a couple of friends that have gone to Shiva, and the way we dealt with things was so different. You're used to thinking outside the box. You're used to thinking things, seeing things from above instead of being very tied up. And in certainly in American culture and American education, it's very narrow-minded. You learn a certain way, and you're stuck in that way. So for me, to be able to see things in this way, it was a real help and a real preparation for this. You know, in Talmud, if you think about it, the way it was is they didn't have books. You know, back in yeshiva in 2,000 years ago, they were arguing about this, but what about this? And then say, well, if you look at it from this perspective, the whole Talmud, the way we study now, is really a compilation of many different people arguing about similar subjects, and the way they approach it and the way they look at things and dissect it. That really is a tremendous education for life in general, specifically in law, of how to properly dissect the situation, cut it up, put it back together, look at it a different way. And, you know, I just spent the whole day yesterday, writing a brief against Wells Fargo, actually, and to be able to take their arguments, dissect it, break it down, and then reinvent it in a light favorable to my client is really something that I honed that skill in yeshiva, and very helpful. The other thing I will tell you, and this has been a big part of my career and a big part of my life, and I really think that I really wish people did it more, especially now with such a heated political climate, is one thing I learned in yeshiva is you have to understand what the other side is arguing. In other words, when the Gemara asks a question or Talmudic scholars are debating, they're actually listening to what the other side says and says, you know what, I hear you, but here's where you're wrong, right? So many times we get in an argument, we just answer. We don't fully understand. So when I hire an associate in my office or people in my office, when I go to court, I tell them, you need to be ready to argue the other side. If the other side didn't show up, you need to be there, ready to argue their side better than they can. It doesn't mean that you agree with them. It doesn't mean that they're right. It just means that you fully understand it, because how can you argue against something that you don't fully understand? So as an experiment, next time you're having a political debate or you're having a debate, stop the other person and say, can you explain to me what you think my position is? And if this is a heated debate, I will put money down that most of the times they will not be able to articulate your position with any degree within what you're actually trying to say. They will only be able to tell you how their own perspective interpreted based on their own narrative. And you say, well, no, that's not what I said. Take a second, listen to me. And now you can actually have a conversation. And I've been in numerous media outlets about the civil rights thing, and I've been saying the whole time is all these protests and all, great, we're making progress, but we're not having a discussion. We're just yelling at each other. When someone says white privilege or you're racist, most white people in America don't identify as racist, right? They really don't. But so when I say, I don't use the word racist because I don't think most Americans are racist. I think that there's an implicit racial bias, which is different than being racist. And I think we need to talk about those things. But when we're just yelling at each other and we're just attacking each other and not even listening, how are we going to have any progress? We need to have a conversation. So for me, in my legal career, it's been really important. And some of and what I'll do in court and some the other side, they get very flustered by it, is after they argue, I will then go ahead and argue better than they did and explain why they're wrong. And the judge, I see the judge's face like that, most people don't do that. But to acknowledge the other side's, with the merits of their case doesn't mean that they're right. It means that you understand it, and all the more reason why I should have the authority to explain to you why they're wrong. So this isn't just in in law, but it's in life in general. It's really important, all these things, to be able to. For me, a lot of my work is on contingency. So a lot of these civil rights cases and consumer cases, I don't get paid unless I win. So I get a percentage of whatever the judgment is or the settlement is. Most of my clients can't afford to pay me my hourly fee. So when I get into a case, I have to make it an evaluation. Is it worth my time? Essentially, I'm investing in a case, right? So I'm investing my time, which is what I deal in. I deal in hours. So I need to make an investment. I need to really understand. So if I got into a case and say, wow, this is I can't believe what happened to you, and not really get into it, understand it, then I ended up losing. So I will do all the research, and before I file a case, I'm going to know what the other side is going to argue, because I will put myself in that position, say, well, if I was defending this case, what would I argue? And how would I fight this? And then let me see, well, how could I fight that? And if I can't, if I don't think I can, I won't take the case. And if we think I can, then I will structure the case in a way to take away those arguments, right? So there's so much about figuring these things out from the beginning. And one of the things I love about being a lawyer and being litigation is it's like a big chess game. You always got to be one step ahead, and that's a lot of what the yeshiva. I think the skills in yeshiva helped me to be one step ahead of the game. Another lesson that I took is preparation. I may not be the smartest guy in the room, but I'm going to be the most prepared. We got to be prepared. You show up to court, whether it's in court, whether it's meeting a client, whatever it is, you got to be prepared. You got to do the work. You never come in there and not put on your best, because you're representing someone else. Especially in my case, I feel I'm representing Jews in general, certainly Orthodox Jews. Whether I like it or not, I'm the poster boy. As people see me, they see how an Orthodox Jew acts, and I feel that responsibility is something that is very important to me. Some of the things that I've learned in this job is one of the biggest things I'll say is empathy. I've learned to have empathy. I've had clients that, it never even occurred to me that these things are happening to people. You walk into someone, you walk into someone in shul and you look at them and you have no idea what's going on in their life. And I deal a lot with community things, and I deal with a lot of things and with shuls, and you just have no idea what someone else is up to. They're having a bad day, and so for me, I think over the last few years, I've really been able to not react, to be a lot less reactive to people, understanding that they're probably going through something in their life and it's not directed at me. And some of the things that I see from my clients that are leaders, are successful businessmen, are successful lawyers, are rabbis, and that people would be shocked at what they're going through in their personal life, whether it's financial, whether it's with family, some of the craziest things that you could imagine. You simply have no idea what the other person is going for. So next time someone is rude to you or off-putting or offensive, just think for a second, what is that person going through? It may not be directed at me. Let me let it slide. And also at the same time, lend a hand. Ask the people how they're doing, because you never know. A simple gesture, a smile can make a real difference in someone's life. And I've seen it happen. I've had clients who were on the verge of suicide who said that, they saw a kid smile and that changed. They decided not to kill themselves. It's really, I know it's very cliche, but I've personally seen it happen. Another lesson that I've taken is something I'm very strict about. I'll never ever respond to an email in anger or emotional. And I get angry at emails, of course, and emotional. What I do is I'll draft an email. I'll write what I wanted to say, and then I'll generally delete it so I get it out of my system. But I will never respond to an email when I'm in an emotional state, because you must have control at all times. And it's okay to be emotional. It's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to lash out. And, I've received so many emails of people being emotional, and it never works out well. Another lesson is always take the high road. We're so often, especially in litigation as a lawyer, you're always faced with fighting or with pettiness. And I've made the decision a long time ago, always take the high road. Even if you have a right to take the low road, it's just not worth it in the end. And thank God I made a reputation for myself that if I decide to take a stand on something, it's for a reason. I'm not going to take a stand on something simply because it's on principle or not. Take the high road, let others live. And certainly, this is not at all to say not to advocate ferociously on behalf of your client. but you got to know where that balance is and never make it personal. So a lot of lawyers tend to take things personally and make it personal. Really, really try and stay away from that. And that really leads to is your reputation. That's what you have, especially in the legal field. All you have is your reputation. It takes years and years to build and seconds, literally seconds to lose. One email, you could lose your entire reputation. So it's something that I take very, very seriously, something we should all take seriously. And one last parting thought, which still shocks you every day, is never put anything in writing that you don't want to see in 20 years, because if you send it in an email or post it online, it's going to be there forever. I'm still shocked at the things that I see people post online in writing and emails. And I'm really careful about what I put in. I try never to write or post things that I wouldn't want, my kids to see in 20 years. So just be aware that even if you delete it, it's still there. I know we were called for an hour or so. Happy to take any other questions. Talk about it. I would say one of the I'll end off on this, that one of the amazing things that I see as a lawyer is hashgacha pratis, which is divine intervention. So we talk about we know that God runs the world and God runs everything, but we're not always privileged or fortunate to see it in my line of work. And it says in our Yom Yom that one of the advantages of being a business is you get to see the divine intervention. And I will tell you, it's unbelievable how day after day you see it. You see how things work out. You see how things that you thought were a mistake or thought were bad end up being even better than you thought they would. And to be able to see this is a real privilege and a real gift, and something that I really treasure, and something that we should all, whatever we do, we should all take a look at and see how the divine intervention really works. With that, I'm gonna be quiet now and see if anyone has any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Chez. I could think of a few things that were said to me when I was a kid that you probably wouldn't want your kids to hear in 20 years, but we're not gonna. It wasn't in writing, so we're not gonna split it here.
Thank you, Rabbi. I always count on you.
And from your, if all else fails, I think you can have a future as a marriage counselor or perhaps a psychologist. It seems to be right up your alley.
Thank you.
I do want to point out that my brother Chezky is a lawyer in trade, but essentially he is a Chabad rabbi. I've been at his house a lot, and regularly at his table you would think it's like a regular Chabad house. You've got guests, and I was there for a sukkot. I would say there was probably over 50 people who otherwise would not have had a Jewish experience, but simply because Chezky was in the courtroom with them. Either on, I think at one time, we actually had the judge and the opposing counsel all in the same sukkah. That made for an interesting meal, if I remember correctly. And it's specifically because, as you said, quoted from the Hayom Yom, that you're in the courtroom with them and sharing their experiences. They don't feel that it is something above them, that it's the rabbi and that they need to reach out and come to shul. It's their friend and somebody that they know and they feel comfortable with. And I think that a lot of times, and maybe perhaps the majority of times, has more of an effect and makes Judaism real. So, kol hakavod to you. And if anyone else doesn't have any questions, if no one else does, we'll make this recording available for those of you that missed it or want to review it later. And I want to wish you, thank you tremendously. It was very inspiring. And
you're very welcome.
Thank you, and to much more. And may you get Germany.
Amen. Fine. Have a happy Sunday. Great Sunday, everybody.